Okay, we're going to call this Cultural Processes, Chapter 2, Part 2. A couple of things came up, and then I realized that I had gone on a little longer than I meant to. I'm trying to keep these fairly brief, but evidently I have too much to say. Okay, here we go. So, counterintuitive elements are sometimes important parts of transmitting something. So, like you have three little pigs. Well, really, what's the point? You're trying to learn the idea of doing things solidly, of taking the steps to make sure that you're completing a full process that's really, like a house that's going to last, but this can apply to your life. Don't do things halfway. Counterintuitive element, pulling the islands out of the sea. Now, if you talk to Nainoa Thompson, um, he'll probably tell you that um, uh, as you cross the water, when you approach an island, it does seem like it comes up out of the sea. So navigation is in a way uh, pulling an island out of the sea. But if you put it that way, I mean, it sounds a little different to have this guy who's physically pulling Maui out of Maui pulling the islands out of the ocean. Well, okay, a little counterintuitive, but you remember it. It makes an impression on you. It's still transmitting the same information. Um, all right. So stereotype consistent information is easy to transmit, but generally it's better for low information value. Things that are more complex and that violate stereotype, well, those may be retained in a slightly different way. Okay, I got to keep moving here. So minimally counterintuitive ideas, wolf who talks, uh, little pigs who build houses, um, navigators who pull islands from the sea, you know. So these are methods of natural pedagogy. Um, Another thing that is really important in this is that these stories build interdependence. All right. So looking at how interdependence works and groups in general, this is based on Bronfenbrenner, but I actually included uh, three, three different systems in this. But in all of them, you have the individual, and this is the most unique, the most specifically you genetically. Around you is your community, your family, your school, kind of going in little concentric layers as it goes out. Toward this is your microsystem. Your mesosystem would go into the larger community, your state, media, social media communities, perhaps. And then the macro system is the time, the history, the um, the global context, the nation, big attitudes, laws, things like this. Okay, we exist in these as individuals in the midst of all this. So all the information is coming to us from these that tell us who and what we are and how to behave. Um, we're acting outward in these systems. And in a way, we are also affecting these systems. So the systems affect us, we affect the systems. Um, so this is kind of reaching my way of describing what is cultural psychology is how does the individual exist within culture? How does the culture shape the individual mind? And how does the individual mind interact with the um, uh, people around them, kind of like with the culture being the more closely related people who think like you, who are going to behave like you, who have the same understanding, who have the same stories, the same religion. Okay, so social identity, this goes into the idea of social identity in SIT. So this is who you believe you are based on your group membership. And this gets really important. SIT mostly has been used in like sociology and social psychology as a way to explain intergroup interactions and especially how to explain intergroup violence. So discrimination, prejudice, um, even talking about wars, who are you, who is part of your group, who is an out group, someone who's not part of your group. All right, so um, we share reality, epistemology, uh, with people closer around us. Uh, so how do we build this understanding, this cooperation? If you've ever, well, okay, so I used to do a lot of carpentry. If you're working with someone who understands carpentry, you can do processes really easily. You can anticipate what's coming next. I also used to cook a lot with a couple of friends where we didn't have to speak. This would be like if you're a professional in a kitchen, you probably don't have to talk a lot about what needs to be done. You have the same understanding of what's the intention of what you're doing, how are the processes to be enacted, what is your goal. These are all things that you um, enact within a shared reality. Okay, so there's physical reality, and there's other things that we validate more by sharing. By the way, these basic slides were done by the publisher, and I'm not terribly fond of them in some ways. So how does culture vary? How do we end up with different cultures? Well, part of it is this idea about physical reality versus shared kind of consensus reality. And the consensus reality um, will start to get us to a point of kind of like where my culture is a little different from another culture. And this could include things like Hofstede's um, masculinity, femininity, which is kind of a long story. It doesn't really match the stereotypes that were in play in 1980 when Hofstede came up with that. But so I see individualism, collectivism has actually been around, predates Hofstede. Um, you'll hear Margaret Mead in the 1930s talking about individualism and collectivism. But this is a way that cultures vary. And this is a way that Hofstede found, excuse me, in his examination of data from 100,000 IBM employees around the world in the 1960s, 1970s. This is a way that he found predicted behavior, predicted differences in employee behavior. So these are dimensions of cultural variability. They're really important in terms of understanding how people in other cultures, why are they behaving differently? All right. So Guanxi, I think it is, Xinjiang, these are two concepts from, I'm not sure actually if it's Mandarin uh, or not. Um, but anyway, it's a Chinese. They're Chinese terms. So Guanxi. Okay. Um, Sorry about that. So these two terms are about um, your relationships and networks, which in China or Japan, these are things, familial relationships may develop over generations. So you could have like in a Japanese business, they may have had the same supplier for 300 or 400 years. In China, it's very important that you honor these old relationships. I mean, it's been a bit disrupted under the communist regime, but I think there's probably new similar relationships that have developed in the time in the past 50 years. All right. So back to these ancient relationships. I've had some interruptions going on. Um, all right. So if you're talking about collectivism and over time how it's important to have these lasting relationships between people, we find this throughout Oceania, throughout the Pacific cultures, really, and especially in Polynesian culture. Because keep in mind, that you're going to take off on a va'a to go for weeks, perhaps across the ocean. You don't know what's going to happen. You really need to be able to work together. You need to imua, right? Move forward together. Um, you need to be pono. You need to be um, righteous in your actions. Um, you need to take care of your kuleana, your garden. You need to, contribute um, that which is your duty to contribute. Okay, so these are all variations that perhaps were evoked through situations, but generally speaking, I think we can say that all humans had to start off very collectivist and cooperative. Okay, so why do cultures change? Well, external forces, climate change is causing some changes for us now, but climate change happened in India probably about 7,000 years ago the first time, again, probably about 3,000 years ago. Egypt used to be swampy, it's a desert now. A lot of that was probably human. Um, there was probably some human influence on why that changed. The agriculture was not really good for that swampy environment. Um, all right, internal forces. Well, even within a community, new leaders come up, new challenges arise. If you're talking internationally, well, we don't seem to get along very well. So, but within the global system, you can look at external or internal forces that are causing changes on bigger societal levels. And of course, we already talked about environmental changes, but novel challenges in general from new conditions right now, as I'm speaking, there's a lot of talk about AI and what that means. And I just read a headline that said that at Davos, the bigwigs of global business, global economy, the very wealthy people, well, last year, evidently, they were all happy and in favor of AI. And this year, it has them kind of freaked out because it's kind of taking its own direction. So this is a new challenge. All right, and then demographic alteration. The US will be probably minority European ancestry by 2050, if not before. Birth rates are down. Um, Demographic alterations are causing a lot of changes in terms of healthcare. Well, I mean, in the US, yes. In New Zealand, for similar reasons, although New Zealand, one of the reasons is that about 20% of people who are born there will leave and go work elsewhere for most of their productive life. And then they come back when they're old and they need medical care. Italy and Japan both have below replacement rate in their reproductive rates. Um, so this is causing a big challenge. Um, and people are moving, have been moving to cities since, well, the 1800s for sure. World War II marked the big movement away from the farms. All right, so demographic alterations and cultural change, lifestyle shifts, and this is kind of encapsulated in Tony's Gemeinschaft and Gesellschaft. So Gemeinschaft is like the village, the rural environment, close social relations, sense of community. And this was pretty much um, uh, humanity for most of what we know about humanity. Gesellschaft is the impersonal society of the city. And so this is a new thing. So Tony's, I think he was late 1800s, early 1900s sociologist looking at the changes that were happening because of this shift from rural to city life. All right, then we're going to talk about intercultural transmission. This is going to be really important when we get to chapter 10. And this is kind of important in terms of life in Hawaii. So acculturation is what happens when people are in contact for extended periods of time, extended durations with another culture. Um, so if you immigrate, you need to acculturate to the dominant culture where you move to some degree. Um, it doesn't mean you need to assimilate. That's a very specific term. Wait for that in chapter 10. But cultures change when they come in contact. And this goes way back. I mean, just look at the noodle. Noodles probably from China. They've been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And yet they're part of like Olive Garden throughout the US. Um, do we have Olive Garden in Hawaii? I think we're getting one on Oahu. Okay. And humans historically met in a couple of particular ways. Migration, when we started moving around, 70, 80,000 years ago, well, we kind of forgot um, that we were all cousins at that point. And so, people have been living apart for a few hundred years. They have some very different ways of being. And it's like, oh, wow, you do that this way. Interesting. Well, let's change our culture. Hopefully, we don't fight about it, but this happens. Trade, merchants have brought culture all over the place, including the noodle, probably, but also including musical instruments. War, bagpipes. Why do we have bagpipes in Scotland? Well, they came from Iran about 2,500 years ago, probably. By then, they were certainly in use. And then they got pretty popular in the Balkans. And the Balkans, the Dalmatians, the people of Dalmatia, which is more like Bulgaria now, great horsemen back in the Roman legion days. And so the the cavalry from Dalmatia uh, were among the troops that went to the British Isles when, the Romans tried for a long, long time to conquer the British Isles. And well, they brought the bagpipes with them. And so the bagpipes stayed. The Romans, you could say they kind of gave up, but in a way they became part, genetically and culturally. It kind of all meshed together. All right. And we can see evidence of cultural change and cultural interaction and cultural elements in a variety of arts. So if you're talking about, um, well, let's say iconography in the church, why would you have a picture of a particular saint? Well, it's a story. Usually there's some kind of virtue that you get from thinking about that saint. Um, Flags. A flag says our nation is great, our nation is important, things like that. Um, excuse me. If you go to a marae in Aotearoa, New Zealand, the marae, all around it are carvings of different ancestors, different kind of mythical or maybe deified um, characters. And you'll find similarities in, I think it's a really fascinating similarity between Aotearoa, between the Maori and the indigenous North Americans of the Pacific Northwest. A lot of similarity in the style of what they do and also in their boats, their canoes, their va'a. All right. So, and then in music, we'll think about it, how uh, how music works. So how did you learn the alphabet? You probably sang a little song. Um, Music affects your body in a couple of ways. For one thing, your heart rate will entrain to the music. You can entrain the breath and heart rate of a whole group of people, for instance, in a choir or everybody singing a national anthem together. Um, it brings people together. That was the title. A colleague of mine, Diana Boer, wrote, uh, um, did a lot of work on how music connects people, even across cultures. So, anyway, we have styles that we share, but we also have informational content in the music that we share. And one last little note on that. Um, when you sing with people, so oxytocin is marvelous endocrine release. It causes a mom to feel connected to a baby at birth. When people fall in love, there's a lot of oxytocin that happens when you sing in a choir. Uh, it's not as big as the birth or the slightly lesser falling in love kind of oxytocin, but you get a little boost of oxytocin when you sing with people. Amazing. Anyway, so and while you're singing together, you're probably singing about stuff. You're in a language that you all share, probably. Although I have sung in choirs where it was, we were just like reading, singing in a different language. But even then, there's a message in the music, and this is a way that we transmit culture really well. Think about think about the civil rights movement and the songs that were used to convey these ideas of civil rights. We shall overcome. Okay, that's it. So thank you. Remember to do your assignments, your weekly assignments, and ask me questions anytime.